All right. Now, let's end our discussion of the scientific method talking about the end results. So it's fine to sit in your lab or in your house or whatever and run these experiments and revise your hypotheses, but there comes a point you have to tell other people about it so that other people know. Once this experiment is finished, that information, it has to be disseminated to the scientific community, to the general public. That's because science is a community effort. It's no good if you keep the information to yourself. If we did that, everyone would have to start from scratch to figure anything out at all, and we wouldn't get anywhere. That would take forever. Imagine having to go to class and by the way, you have to derive DNA. Figure it out by. That's not going to work. So, what usually happens is a scientist is going to research a problem. They're going to work in their lab long hours and write in those books like I showed you and all that sort of stuff. And eventually they're going to come up with a conclusion. The results and the conclusion of this scientist's experiment are then sent out to the scientific community. There's a bunch of ways that we can do this. The most common ways is either through presentation at professional conferences or through some sort of publication. So they give them to the scientists through our publications or through presentations. Conferences are probably some of the more fun ways, unless you're super into reading and a super introvert. But conferences are usually annual events. They're put on by organizations. So I've talked extensively now about American Academy of Forensic Sciences, about NAFIA. Those are examples of these professional organizations that have conferences. So they're put on by these organizations of scientists, and the scientists are all interested in the same type of research. It could be very broad, like AAFS, American Academy of All Forensic Sciences, or much more narrow, much more specific, like the North American Forensic Entomological Association, right? So that's the idea. This simply gives scientists a place to present their data. It gives them an opportunity to get feedback on their research from people who are in the same region, in the same area, doing the same type of stuff. So it's the exact same thought processes there. You get this feedback, this information gets out. And this is a very fast way to get the newest information in the field. So if you're interested in what is happening, what is going on in research, then you want to go to a scientific meeting because you will learn exactly what is new and what is happening before it's published. And so that is really, really neat. You get the cutting edge stuff there. Now, this photo, this actually shows one of my old lab mates. She's a doctor now. She is presenting some research right here at the North American Forensic Entomological Conference. So she was working on some Rufossi stuff, and here she is presenting. So in the audience, there was a whole bunch of forensic entomologists, and we're all listening to this new research on this particular maggot that she has been researching for the past 2 years. So we knew about this before anybody else did. Awesome. Publication, the second major way of getting your stuff out, that takes a heck of a lot longer than going to a conference. I mean, when you go to a conference, you have to submit your research for consideration. So depending on how prestigious the conference is, I mean, it's a pretty good chance that you'll get accepted as long as it's not a bunch of made up stuff. And then you usually submit this about 6 months prior, and then you go present it. In publication, it takes a bit longer. It has to go through a massive vetting process and a bunch of rewrites and all that sort of stuff. I mean, the goal of science, the dream, is to send in a paper for publication and have it come back from all your peer reviewers and ever going, yep, you're fine. You don't have to change anything. Oh, that would be amazing. But it never happens. So original research is usually published first in a scientific journal. There's a whole bunch of scientific journals out there, and scientific journals are something that we call primary resources. So these journals are usually only read by other scientists or other people interested in the nitty-gritty of research. If you go to your library, you'll be able to find a whole bunch of scientific journals. Your library has databases of different journals and different subjects. So they've got medical journals, they've got agricultural journals, they've got forensics journals. They've got all manner of different types of journals. It's these journals that we publish our research in. So some of these journals are very, very pointed, very specific. Others are much more broad. That's just the way it works. Now, the research then may be published in other things like books or newspapers or magazines, on blogs, those sorts of places. These are what we call secondary resources. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between a primary resource and a secondary resource. And it's very easy to tell the difference between the two if you know where to look. So primary resources are the primary means of scientific communication, hence the name primary, right? So primary journal articles, they are the original research, the first place that it is disseminated to a very large audience. Because if you think about it, a conference, even if it's a really big conference, it's going to have what? A few hundred, maybe 1,000 people there? You put it in a journal, that will be hundreds of thousands of people have access to it. So this is the major way to disseminate this information across the world. So primary journal articles follow a very specific format, and the details of this format, that's based on the journal, but they need to have certain things. They usually start with an abstract. An abstract is a quick little blurb that tells you what's going on in that article. So it is giving you a quick little overview of, okay, here's the question, here's the hypothesis, here's a little bit of background information, here's what we did, here's our basic results, here's our conclusion. So, it's maybe 500 words, quick overview. Its job is what I like to call the elevator pitch of the journal article. It is a quick synopsis that you can read when you're trying to go through 1,000,001 articles to find information. You read this thing and say, oh yeah, that's really interesting. I would like to learn more about this. Or yeah, this fits exactly. Or nope, that's nothing that I want to do with. Peace out. And so it gives you an idea of what's going on. So it'll start with an abstract. And then you're going to have an introduction. This introduction's job is to present the question, to present the observation in such a way that lets the world know that you've done your due diligence. So you usually start out with sort of a general observation. This is what's going on. Then you show that you've actually looked up the answer. You've delved into the literature and you have citations of background material. So it's full of citations. There should be a whole bunch of in-paper citations in the introduction saying, here's what we know, and here's how I came to this question, except you never use first person in scientific writing. It's always, it's always second person or third person. And so you don't use first person. Anyhow, so here's what I know. Here's what's going on. Here's how this question came about. Here's all the information you need to come up with this hypothesis. And this is what we're going to do. Here's our actual question. So it has this introduction with this citation of the background material. Then it moves into the methods. And this method section is designed to allow anyone reading the paper to replicate your experiment. So you need to have enough information with enough sources that somebody can actually replicate things. Now, there's a delicate balance between being too specific and being too general. So you want to have, enough info saying, oh, this is the type of fly I use. This is where the fly came from. Either you reared it out or you caught it wild. This is the type of bait I used. This is the type of cage I used. But you don't need to say things like, I put it exactly 10 millimeters on the edge of the bench or something like that. Things that aren't going to actually affect the experiment substantially, you don't need to put in there, but you need to put in enough where it can be replicated. So you put in your materials and methods. In a lot of scientific journals, they ask for the sources of these things. So if you got, say, sugar from a particular company or a cage from BioQuip, which is an entomology company, or a cage from another major company, then somebody could get that exact cage if they wanted it. So you have to put in the manufacturer and where you got it from and all that stuff. Then you have the experiment, then you have your results section. And the results section is just a straight up, this is my data. Here it is. You don't try to analyze it in any way. You don't try to look at it, nothing. It's just, here are my results. Here's the data. Here's the statistics that I used on it, and here's some pretty graphs to look at it, and that sort of thing. Then you move into your discussion or your conclusion. Your discussion is there so that you can interpret the results for the reader. A really good scientific paper, and as you start reading more scientific papers, you should start noticing this. A really good scientific paper doesn't leave a lot to the imagination for the reader. A good writer is going to set up the question beautifully in the introduction so that as you're reading it, you should come up with a question yourself. So they should be setting it up. Let's go back to, do insects show up on dead bodies? That type of experiment I've been talking about, right? So do insects show up on dead bodies? So I can start my introduction by saying, bodies are out there, but they never stay around. And where do they go? And we've noticed they're eaten by a bunch of animals. And I have citations for all this and observations for that. And then we notice that there are flies that also show up. And we notice that there are maggots that then feed on the thing. And by the end of this narrative, you should be thinking like, I wonder if maggots show up on all dead bodies. And then suddenly that's my question. Haha, let's find out if maggots show up on dead bodies. Here's my hypothesis. Here's how I tested it. You go, that's really good. Neat. Then in your discussion, you're going to interpret the results. You don't want to leave anything up to the imagination again. You want to interpret the results all manner of ways. Try to figure out what they actually mean. You're going to look at statistics. You're going to pull in other resources. You're going to compare and contrast this with other research that's out there. You're going to tie it back to your introduction. And so by the end of that discussion, you're basically telling the reader, this is what it all means, and this is what you think now, and now this question is answered. And by the way, here are 14 other questions that have come up because of it, and here's how you can answer those too. You're welcome. So a good article doesn't leave anything to the imagination. Now, at the very end of this article, you need a reference section. If you're just writing something out and you don't reference it, that's when everybody calls bullshit. Nope, that is not real because you are not giving proof with other scientific papers. You have to have that. And when I teach scientific writing, I get students that always ask me, how many references do you need? There's no clear answer for that. It's enough to prove your point. Rule of thumb, though, I want to see a good page of references when you list them all out in the bibliography. 2 or 3 references? No. With the amount of information you have here, no. You should have about 25 or 30 references in a simple paper. I've seen papers that have hundreds of references, and that's a good amount. That right there, yep, you believe it. Good. Okay, so you want those references. Now, once you submit your paper to a journal, they're not just going to accept it. Instead, it goes into peer review. Peer review is a system that is set up to allow other scientists, both those that are really closely related to your field and others that are a little more broad, to read your article and critique it. So they get the article before it's published. Anytime you become a scientist, and even when you become a grad student, if you decide to go that route, you'll probably start peer reviewing papers. They will send you these papers. It'll have all this information on there. You'll have a little questions that the editor is going to ask, and you go through this paper with a fine-tooth comb. You look for any problems. You look for any weird logical things that just like fallacies that are problematic. You look for biases. You look for things that are obviously wrong. So I've read papers that have been amazing and I haven't had anything to add. I've read papers where you're looking at the materials and methods going, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You're looking at the grammar, you're looking at everything, and you're giving feedback to the authors. Then at the end, you give basically a line-by-line information to the authors, change this, do that, this is weird, what are you talking about, etc. And then you tell the editor either, yes, this paper should be published just as is, this paper needs, say, minor revisions, this paper needs major revisions, or this is not a good paper, do not publish it. So there's all these different options for you. You can decide yes or no. Is this going to be good or bad? Should it be published or not? So then the editor will take all these reviews from these peer reviewers and make a decision. And it might be that you decided this paper was bad, but there were 5 other peer reviewers and they said, no, it's perfect. And so the editor looks at you, you don't have a big background in this, and they just go, okay, nope, this is fine. Other times they will, you will say it's good, but the editor decides it needs more work. So the authors will then get this paper back. You'll get the reviews from the peer reviewers, and the peer reviewers are anonymous, so you don't know who they are. Although once you get into the field, you tend to get a feel for who some of these people are. So that's kind of fun when you get a paper back and you're like, oh, I know that guy. I hate that guy. But I'm kidding, mostly. All right, so you get this information, it's all anonymous, and you decide if you want to incorporate it, what you want to do. And so then the editor tells you, make these revisions and return it, we can get it published. Or this isn't going to work for our publication at all, here's some massive revisions, maybe rework everything, send it to another journal or something like that. So this basically keeps authors from just making stuff up in papers, which is great. And it's the whole point of peer review. So when you see something that has not been peer reviewed, you really want to take that with a grain of salt, because there's no other scientist that has been looking at that. There's no way to really check people to make sure that they haven't let their normal biases cloud their vision, that they haven't made obvious mistakes, that they haven't missed major portions of the literature, that something weird like that hasn't happened. So primary resources have all of those things. Secondary resources are those that do not follow this format, that do not have those aspects of the primary resource. So if it's missing some part, then it is a secondary resource. So just a general rule of thumb, if something is, or you can consider something a secondary resource if the authors did not do the experiment themselves. So if they are writing about an experiment someone else did, if the authors are, say, summarizing research and results from a whole bunch of different papers, then it's a secondary resource. If it's not peer reviewed, it's a secondary resource. So these resources tend to be for both the general public and for scientists. They can be published all over the place. They tend to be published in popular magazines and books online, but they can be found on journals or in journals. They can be found on just normal websites and newspapers, things like that. The most common type of secondary article that you use as a scientist is the review article. A review article is an overview of current research. So it tends to be a great resource for background on something because it's the summary of all the important developments in an area of research. You're reading, you will find there are some papers that you look at that are just this big overview of what happened throughout time. That's a good review article. The bibliography then is a great list of all the significant articles important to the development of a field. What's interesting about a review article is that it's written for scientists, not for the general public. It's still a secondary resource because it's not original research, but it is published in primary journals. It is published where scientists will read it, and we use these review articles as a really quick and much easier way of getting a review of the background. So when you start into a new field, for example, you can go and find some really great review articles and read about them. They tend to be pretty long. They have hundreds of articles, and then you can use that bibliography as a good starting point for your research, for your hypotheses. So a review article is secondary, but it is written for scientists. Now, it is relatively easy to tell a primary resource from a secondary resource. So if and when I ask you to, say, write something and I need you to use primary resources or I need you to use secondary resources, this is what I'm talking about. To find a primary or secondary resource, you want to look up an article, you want to look up something. And number one, you want to check where it is published. So this is an example of how we see articles being pulled up when you do a Google search for them or you search in your library, something like that. So you first check its publication. That's usually right at the top. You can see this is published in the Journal of Forensic Science. It was published in 2005. It's volume 50 and issue 3, and these are the pages. So that Journal of Forensic Science, you can go look up and see what that journal is. So if I were to go do a search for the Journal of Forensic Sciences, I would probably get to its main website, its author page, and it would tell me all manner of things like this is a peer-reviewed journal. This is how many reviewers. This is the type of stuff we have. So if it's peer-reviewed and it has all this stuff, it's a primary journal article. So this is the first place you want to check. If you end up having something that is published in, I don't know, Jim Bob's Journal of Forensic Fun Stuff, and it's not peer reviewed and it's just Jim Bob writing things, it's not going to be a primary article. So just keep that in mind. And actually, when you become a scientist or when you become a grad student even, you'll start getting all these solicitations for publishing in really expensive journals because you have to pay money to publish in them. I got one solicitation where they said, "We don't want to stifle the scientist's creativity, so we do not peer review." What? So I got with a bunch of friends and we put together a bunch of limericks, and I just submitted that for possible publication. We'll see if it comes through. Just a limerick paper. Just secondary resource if it's not peer reviewed. So you check to see. You can look up the journal. Is it a well-known journal? Do a lot of people publish there? So that's the first thing you want to do. Second, check the title. So let's say it's in the Journal of Forensic Science. Okay, that's a good journal. Now let's look at the title. So in this case, we've got this paper that is an alternative for the extraction and storage of DNA from insects in forensic entomology. Okay, that sounds pretty sciencey, right? That sounds like they actually ran an experiment. They sound like they have some methods, maybe, that they came up with something. They tried some things. Okay, so that title makes it seem like this is probably a primary resource. Then you want to check the abstract. So this abstract is here. Remember, the abstract is the overview, and you want to check it for two things. First, you want to check it for the methods that they used. So here, we've got, in particular, this tested their ability to effectively extract DNA from specimens and store and provide a DNA template in a suitable condition for the amplification of polymerase chain reaction. So you want to check it for the methods, and you want to check it for the results. So in this case, it said provides a FDA cards therefore appear suitable for the for use with caliphorids, provide a new method of extraction. So here we've got what they did and what the results were. Cool. So this hits all those boxes, right? We've got it's published in a peer-reviewed journal. It's got an abstract. It's got materials and methods. It's got results. It's got all those parts right there. Then finally, and this sometimes makes it much easier than anything else, in some places, they will actually tell you what the publication type is. In this case, it's an evaluation study. Great. This is a primary article. So all these things put together tell me it's a primary article. We can do the same thing with this type of thing. So let's check everything here. So here's another article. First off, we're going to check where it was published. So this is The Biologist from London. It was published in 2001. Notice there's a volume and issue numbers and there's pages. That looks pretty interesting. If you go up and look up this Biologist, though, it's basically a magazine. It's a scientific magazine. You look at the author page, it's not peer reviewed. It's invited authors and they can write whatever they want. Okay, so that's interesting. So we know that it's not published in a peer-reviewed journal. That's pretty much going to tell us right away that this is not a primary resource. But let's keep checking. Next, the title. Notice that the title is more popular culture here. Forensic entomology. What can maggots tell us about murders? That sounds very different from the efficacy of using extraction DNA methods, blah, 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 right? So in secondary articles, we tend to see something that is much more friendly to the general public. What can maggots tell us about murder? That's gripping, isn't it? So most people wouldn't want to sit down and read about DNA extraction methods unless you're super into that as a scientist. But somebody says, hey, what can maggots tell us about murder? You're like, I don't know, let's find out. Pretty good indication that it's a secondary article. Next, you're going to check the abstract for the materials and methods. Look at this abstract. It's just a couple of things. It says there was dismembered remains of bodies that were discovered in Devil's Beef Tub. Awesome. On examination, the body parts were infested by maggots. Oh. Yeah, there's no methods in there. There's no results in there. It's a story. They're telling you a story. Finally, if you check this publication type, notice it says review. Yeah. This is a secondary article. It is not a primary article. All right. One more time. So this is an article that is published in the U.S. News and World Report, right? So again, you check where it's published. You want to check for the title. So in this case, published in U.S. News and World Report. Go and look that up. Yep, that's a popular magazine. It's called Murder They Chirped. The role of entomologists in criminal investigations. As fun as it would be for me to title a primary article Murder They Chirped, that would be frowned upon. One, because flies don't chirp, that's crickets, and also that is weird and doesn't sound right. So I would be reamed by peer reviewers in this case. Okay, look at the abstract. Court testimony, forensic entomologists can help convict or acquit murder suspects. No materials and methods, no nothing. And this doesn't even give us a publication type. So this is definitely a secondary resource. Now, where do we find these articles? First and foremost, your library. Because you're at a university, you have some amazing access to the library. Use it. It is one of those things that practitioners who are not associated with university libraries wish that they had. So I should have a video up for you somewhere about how to use your library, but go on there and figure it out, because you can do searches for whatever you want at your library, and the resources you have at your fingertips are amazing. If you need help, that's what librarians are for, especially reference librarians. They will walk you through how to find exactly what you want. Go and visit them. They're amazing. Now, if you don't want to go to the library, or for some reason the library search function isn't working very well or something like that, Google Scholar is an amazing resource. If you are logged in to your library or to your internet on campus. If you are logged in on campus, this works at a lot of universities, Google Scholar can read that. You go to scholar.google.com, do a search, and it works just like Google does, except it's looking for articles. It's looking for both primary and secondary articles. And it can give you a little notification saying, yep, this is available at your university. Because it can tell if you're logged in through your university's internet access or not. Neat. And if it does that, you should be able to click it and go directly to that page on your university library. This is pretty much how I do all my searches now, is I will log in through my university VPN. I will then go to scholar.google.com, I will do a search, and then I will go and find the articles. What's wonderful about this matter, using both your library and Google Scholar, is you get to use the power of this awesome Google algorithm, and you get to use the resources of your library to get the full article. Finally, and this is a really overlooked way of finding articles, is use the references from other articles. This is huge. This is why I love starting a new research project by looking at the review articles, because they've already compiled for me hundreds of articles that could work for my research. So I'm going to read this article. They're going to say a phrase. And you should know, when you cite things from all your basic science classes, but whenever you say a fact or something like that, you need to cite your sources. So you can see where it's cited, go, oh, this says that maggots show up on bodies. Where did they get that information? I can go to the references, see the paper where it came from, go and find that paper. To find that paper, I can either just type in its title into Google, or I can go to the library and type in the citation. Try to find it that way. Then I can read that article. Then I can go to that article's references and see what else is happening. Basically, you go down all these different rabbit holes of, okay, these are all these different facts. Let's trace it back to its original. And you keep going that way. So these 3 ways, primary ways to find your different articles. All right, that's enough of me blathering on about science and that sort of thing. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon.